Hey, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Blind Ambition with Jack Kelly. It's your friend Rick from Blind, and today we are going to introduce you to Charles Beadnall, who's the Chief Technology Officer at GoDaddy, where he leads the company's global platform and infrastructure organization. Before joining GoDaddy in 2013, he was responsible for ad serving and personalization platforms at Yahoo. Before Yahoo, he held engineering leadership positions at MetaWeb Technologies, VeriSign, and W.R. Hambrecht and Company. GoDaddy is the world's largest service platforms for entrepreneurs around the globe. It's on a mission to empower its worldwide community of 21 million customers and entrepreneurs everywhere by giving them all the help and tools they need to grow online. We're excited to have you on the show. Thanks for coming, Charles.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Don't think I gave your bio enough justice. Can you walk us through your career?
I think anytime you put a bio together, you put a couple of highlights. But ultimately, I'd say my career kind of started right around the time that the internet was starting to become commercialized. Was involved with Archie and Gopher and FTP and things like that. And obviously, the really big shift was the Mosaic browser, and soon after that, Netscape. And the first company that I had an opportunity to really get more deeply involved with it, obviously as a user, but I joined Turner Broadcasting and helped build out some of the first internet systems for CNN, which was a really fascinating window into the internet and its potential impact on people. Obviously, a big news event happens and everybody has this visceral need to understand what happened, how did it happen? And so you would see these just massive influx of requests coming in to find out new information about whatever kind of activity happened. So my career since that point has really tracked with large-scale internet companies. And obviously, there have been lots of iterations along this path. The network has grown, it's extended to mobile devices, it's extended to commerce, it has extended social media and things like that. And my career has kind of tracked with that, implementing a lot of new and different technologies along that path, whether it be at Yahoo and building, the core systems there, or MetaWeb was one of the first semantic web companies. So understanding how the different pieces of data fit together into a graph. And ultimately, I think a lot of those technologies have ended up, being pretty core and fundamental to how we operate. About 10 years ago, I was approached by, at the time, CEO of GoDaddy, who had been at Yahoo, and asked to join. And so looked at the company, and it was at an interesting phase at that point. Obviously, it had a good market share, but it needed probably some work, on the technical side. Really have appreciated having an opportunity to contribute to building out a large-scale technical platform to help very small business. It's got a really great mission in life to really help out very small businesses. And a lot of people, when they think about small business, they think of 20-person companies and things like that, maybe 200. A lot of our customers are solo entrepreneurs. It may be a part-time gig. And so anytime that you can help them take advantage of technology and speed that adoption and usage curve, you're helping them out. So that's kind of a quick arc of,
If I understand it correctly, it seems like it's woven into the fabric with experimenting that you have thousands of engineers that you iterate and try. Let's do this and see if it works. Let's try something else to see if it works. It's interesting to me from an outsider perspective that you just don't go in, okay, we're doing it and that's it. It's like, okay, let's try this experiment and see if this is better for our customers. Let's try this experiment. Is that right? Is that how it works?
Yeah, that's exactly right. If you think about what are we in business to do? It's to help these very small businesses get up and running. And when you look at what does it take to do that, frankly, historically, it's been a lot of learning about a domain name, and within a domain name, there are these A records and MX records. And so over multiple years, we have continued to improve and make that experience easier and quicker, such that folks that want to cut hair or they want to do photography or whatever, they don't spend their time putting together lots of complex technical infrastructure, but ultimately they're just guided along that path as much as is possible. I think is really an additional tool that we can bring to bear to help those small businesses get those requisite steps done as expeditiously and seamlessly as possible. It's a huge opportunity. And it's one that I would say we're still in beginning innings. We are definitely focused on helping our customers build out content on their site, helping them find the right domain name in the first place. As they want to sell more items, like upload a photo, have it automatically fill out the text, anything that we can do along that path to help them out. This is one area where I'd also provide a little bit more insight into how we operate. We do really focus to how we experiment into new technologies. I think a lot of folks will just say, oh, here's the new technology and here's the product roadmap, and we're just going to go off and do it. We, I guess, in some ways acknowledge that we don't know the future. And so we are going to experiment our way into that. We came together with a hypothesis that this is a really big customer need. I mean, ultimately, when you think about what a customer wants from us, they want help along that path of going from purchasing a product to actually using it, to having customers find their website, transact, whatnot. We want to help them along that path. We call it the value achieved path. Is something where they are getting value from us. And just because they purchased a domain, just because they may own a particular product set, they're not necessarily getting any value out of that just by giving us the money. So we want to help them along that path as much as is possible, as quickly as possible, because that means ultimately they'll be a customer for longer. My observation is that there are many companies and organizations that, will have a narrative about here's what we're doing and how we're going to go about it, and they build out the roadmap. And ultimately, the narrative will support that roadmap for quite a long while. You can really go down that path pretty far before you figure out that maybe that wasn't the best path. So what experimentation, in my mind, really does is it forces you to have the premeditated thought that goes into if I do this thing, this is the result that I would expect to happen. So you really got to have that key observation of, hey, I think customers want this. But it also forces you to look at the data that you have about customer usage and purchase paths and things of that nature, and put together a hypothesis that if I did this, this is what would happen. In doing that, you really start to form the kernel of inverting that whole product roadmap into basically a series of experiments that you can do iteratively over time. And so you can learn very quickly, oh, wow, that I was totally wrong. There's something else that's happening here. And ultimately, it forces you to figure that out at an earlier stage, as opposed to moving down the path really far and then having the insight, oh, gee, maybe we didn't go quite down the right path. And again, many companies can go down that path and it works out quite well. But I think that inversion is really a key learning for me from different companies that I've been at. Obviously, Yahoo spent a lot of time running experiments, having a common platform for running a lot of experiments. That is something that we have implemented. And so really institutionalizing that, any engineer, any product leader in the company can come forward with an idea and we can run an experiment on it. And ideally, many of these experiments can be run with fairly minimal effort. I mean, we don't always have to go off and build some new platform or some new tool. There's a lot less conflict with experimentation than there would be without it. If you look at a more traditional product roadmap, everybody's got an opinion, whether it be an engineer or a product leader. And ultimately, it's a battle of the wills where somebody's going to win, but it's based on the narrative, the level of influence, or who can shout the loudest or have the most overwhelming verbal arguments. Whereas I think when you focus on running the experiment and having the focus be on the data, it's ultimately a great leveler, because this is the data, this is the output that we all agreed upon in the experiment, and the data will speak and it will say, this is what customers want, this is what customers don't want. So there's far fewer disagreements. And I think it ultimately pulls people together because they'll see the data and say, well, gee, that's not expected. Or maybe some of them will say, yeah, well, I told you so. It really does help bring teams together in the service of the customer in a way that I think a lot of more traditional kinds of roadmaps and things like that just don't have the capability of doing. You can also just test the user behavior to see, would they go down a particular path if it were available to them, before you go off and build the underlying service or product underneath that. I've heard engineers say that experimentation is kind of like crack. for engineers. Because ultimately, as an engineer building a product, you just want to know that people are actually going to use it. If you're going down and working on a roadmap of items that you're just continuing to deliver, and you don't see the data coming back that says, yeah, this is actually being used as you're deploying the code, you lose some of that fidelity and the reaction of, hey, what I did actually matters to customers and they're using it. Whereas if you have that hypothesis, you have the data that you can see coming back in terms of customers using it, you get the feedback immediately that yes, people actually value this feature or this capability that I've launched. It really more tightly integrates the product and engineering teams together and in the service of ultimately the customer.
Charles, I want to pull a bit at this thread because I find this discussion of how you built a culture of experimentation pretty interesting. I think some people might be surprised to hear that from a public company CTO, to be very frank, right? Where there may be other competing priorities at hand that might not allow for the time to experiment, where maybe you're getting pressure from other parts of the org that says, no, just do it once and do it right and get it done. How did you create this culture within your organization at the company?
That's a great question. It certainly takes a good amount of executive sponsorship, and our CEO is very supportive and has been one of the greatest champions of it. We also have really good team that both built the underlying technical platform for collecting the data, and leveraging that. So in terms of how do you switch the culture, it definitely is a cultural phenomenon that takes a while to move along. And it is something that we celebrate internally. One of the most well-attended meetings run in the company is this experimentation showcase where we highlight the top 10 experiments that get voted on. And, some of them are successes, some of them are failures, some of them are draws. But ultimately, we celebrate the failures just as much as the successes because there's learnings involved in those failures. I think that it is something that happens at a deep level, but to kind of focus on the question, hey, do it right, and well, that's fantastic. If you're really certain and you really understand exactly what the customer wants, sure, maybe it's a little bit faster, but if you think about it, you're not always going to be right. And the other thing is, why wouldn't you want to know that you were right with data to back it up? And so the amount of effort it takes, we had a platform, we have data flowing from all of the different experiences such that we can start to, measure whether it's, cash receipts or customer activation or whatever it is. It does take some effort to get to that level of data, surfacing that, making it available. But once you have that, it's relatively easy to create an experiment. The actual cost of running each individual experiment is pretty lightweight.
What are some examples of the data? Is it, because I know you mentioned about customers, and I guess you have very rabid fans as customers because it sounds like they reach out to the company and say, hey, I love this, or maybe not so much. But what other data points do you put all together?
Ultimately, as many different data sources as we can, whether that be the internals of the systems, obviously all of the customer surface areas, whether that be the advertising campaigns that they may have clicked on to get to, our sales site, the products that they looked at, what they put in their cart, what they purchased, the products that they purchased, how many of them did they use and activate, ultimately the traffic that goes to the sites. So there's kind of a pretty broad spectrum of data that we pull together. It's over 1 billion different, interactions that happen, every month that we can, pull together and see what's happening. And obviously we're going to continue to add more and more because ultimately all of that data, helps us create this virtuous cycle where we get more data in. We're able to create more tailored experiences for our customers on the other side of it.
Perhaps the proof is in the pudding. Your tenure at GoDaddy has involved some pretty ambitious projects, as I understand it. Your team has built a search engine from scratch. I believe you have created more than 50 large language models. How do you prioritize the projects and decide what technical problems to take on when the company's mission is quite ambitious and the scope is quite large? Where do you focus?
That's a great question. I wish I could give you like a super simple answer. I'd say the company has gone in different phases along the years. The first phase was really to build the best product or the second best product in every major category, whether it be domains or sites or email. We really wanted to up level our product capabilities. And the phase that we're on right now is really making those much easier to use together. Ultimately, it comes down to what is going to both build a common technical platform underneath all of that that is beneficial to multiple different products. And so again, experimentation, data platform would be good examples of things that you can build across the different experiences, but you can leverage it multiple different times across multiple different businesses and products and experiences, while at the same time focusing on some form of value to the company too, whether that's selling more products or getting greater usage and activation. It's a combination of those two things, where if you can see how you're going to basically make more money or help the customer do their jobs better, you can build a common platform in the process that could be used for other things. That's the magic combination. I think the areas where you're going to build a platform, but you don't really have the particular use case or the value that you're going to drive, those are hard. We've done a couple of those, but just because we knew that if you don't do this, there are going to be other things down the road you can't do. There's certain areas where you have one-way doors and two-way doors where you can, just do something and throw it away and reverse it if you don't find that it works out, and other places where once you go down a path, like you're totally stuck. So you really have to think about that at a super meta level. I think each of the major steps that we've taken has been premeditated in terms of we're going to build products that are the best. We're going to leverage common technical infrastructure that is the best, which enables our engineers to build better products. And obviously now, focusing on and common tools that can help us build connected experiences, for our customers. So
I appreciate this vision that you've laid out. How did you get to that point, in your engineering leadership, your career arc? What's the transition like from individual contributor, coder, programmer, all the way to being able to, communicate at this level and set organization-wide, company-wide strategy and vision?
That's a great question. This might be an oversimplification, but I always think of it as being a problem solver. And, along the way to become a manager, you're solving bigger problems or a different problem, something that's important to the business that you might not have been able to have solved individually. And each step along the way, a lot of it is really understanding enough of the business that you can be thoughtful about applying yourself to solve a problem that's important to the business. That's the story of my arc, has really been focusing on what does the business need, and I'm going to help solve that problem. I personally am motivated by solving problems. And I think as a technologist, it's fun because ultimately you're getting to apply technology and people to solve, fundamental business challenges. GoDaddy, it was let's build the best products. That's a fun experience, in and of itself, building the core search mechanism for finding a domain name and things like that. Those are great technical problems, but they're also really key to the business. And obviously technologists like solving problems, even like technical problems, even more so than business problems. If you can marry those two together, like find the right business problem that you're going to solve and the right technical problem, like that's where you kind of reach this maximal satisfaction, as a technical person. Each step along that way, it's really trying to keep looking at, all right, what's the next problem to solve? Like, what does the company need from me? We need to pull, our services and products together better. What are ways to do that? As an example.
Hearing you talk about this is one of the keys to success after decades of doing this work. I love how you say it's fun. Most people, when they're working for years and years and years, they don't classify their job as fun anymore. So is that what keeps you fresh and excited, that you just love doing this work and it's something you wake up in the morning and you can't wait to get into the office and get it working on a project?
Yeah, I think you have to. Like, if you don't enjoy it, you should probably find something different to do, at some point. And of course, like every job, I mean, there are certain things that get mundane or whatnot, but I think that having that view of like, what am I going to do? What problem am I going to solve? How am I going to help the company? And to be in a position, you don't have to be the CTO to solve problems for the company. I mean, you could be a line level engineer working on a particular area, but you just have to think about it in a different way in terms of how am I going to solve, business problems? How am I going to contribute? You can come forward with an idea and you can turn that into an experiment. You can basically run that out in front of customers and get the data back and say, yeah, Like I did something and it was valuable to customers, and here's the data to prove it. At a personal level, you have to have that motivation and interest in what the business is doing. I have seen, a number of folks that if you just focus on the technical side of it and not, the business implications, it can kind of blind you to what the business finds important. You do have to have kind of both sides of that equation. You really have to pay attention to what the business needs. And obviously you're in a technical role, so you need to, help find the right technologies to map to that as well.
Many of our listeners, they work at these huge companies, Alphabet, Microsoft, where it might be challenging to figure out what the business goals are. Maybe it's they only have insight into their unit or their team or their Scrum's function. And so how do they gain that perspective? Do you have any advice for those that are seeking that broader scope or that broader awareness?
I had a mentor really early on in my career, and I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was something to the effect of good things happen to people who are useful. You want to meet with folks, understand what are the business priorities and things like that. But if you're asked to do something, do a good job at it. I mean, put your weight behind it and really do a good job. That will open up the conversations of, hey, what's the next important thing, for the group, with your manager, other, folks around it, and opportunities will start to present themselves. That's number one, is just do a good job of what you've been given. You're all into it. And then obviously start networking to really understand that a perspective of why was that important or why was that not important. I know many organizations have implemented, OKRs and things like that, such that a lot of it becomes more transparent. So you can kind of see that, and blind to that, as well.
Charles, you mentioned about the mentor gave you this advice. Rick and I, we're probably 150 episodes in. Rick, think about it. I would say maybe 70% of the executives we speak to would refer to like, hey, I got to where I am because of a mentor. What's your take on it? Do you mentor people? Did you have a mentor that got not only that advice you shared now, but like throughout your career that really made a difference?
Yes. And so I think that the nuance that I would put around that is when people think about mentorship, they often think about having a meeting with someone, every couple weeks or every month, and I'm going to just magically learn from a person. It's a little bit different than that. Ultimately, there's got to be a mutual exchange of value. The mentors that I learned the most from were basically superiors, and it could have been 1 or 2 or 3 levels removed at various different stages of my career. But I was doing exactly what I had just talked about, where I was working really hard. I was delivering, value, and that opened up the opportunity to talk to those individuals about what's next, what else can I help with? It's really in the context of I'm helping them out, like I'm doing good work that's delivering value to them and helping them in their careers. But they in turn were much more willing to share some of their time with me because ultimately I helped them out. When you think about a mentorship arrangement, it's not just going to someone and saying, give me the advice. It's ultimately helping them in things that matter to them. What opens the door to their reciprocal support.
I appreciate that advice because I think it can be so easy to take the tactical route, right? Where it's like, I'm going to meet with this person because I've read their bio or I see where they are in the org chart and I want to do that role in, 3, 5, whatever years. Can you just give me a download, Charles, right? And for that other person, maybe they're getting reached out to by a lot of folks, or maybe they simply don't have the time. Or to your point, there's certainly a lot of priorities that they need to get done right now. And so if you're able to help them out and actually build that relationship and make it a two-way street, then that serves to be quite a powerful unlock.
Yeah, and I think most people that I know, they are always willing to help. So the one other thing that I would add is you should feel free to ask. It would just be, not just asking for, hey, can you be my mentor? But it's always helpful if you have a proposition of, hey, I need help with this particular thing. We have this problem that we need to deal with, whether it be as a company or as an organization, but it's something we would both self-identify. Yeah, that's a problem. We need to address it. But I mean, coming forward and saying, I want to help solve this problem for you. And I'm willing to do these things to help along that path. I'd really appreciate your advice on it. I mean, my gosh, like as a manager, why wouldn't you spend time with that person if they're going to help you solve a problem that you have and they're willing to help you with it? Like you'd be dumb not to. Of course, you should make the time. And I think that assuming a positive outcome, I mean, that opens a whole bunch of different opportunities down the door.
What if you're earlier in your career and you feel like this advice sounds great, but I'm early on, I'm new to the company, I'm new to my career, my function. What if I don't have much to give to a director or a vice president or a CTO or even a manager? How do I get beyond that kind of hurdle?
You probably wouldn't necessarily start with a VP or something like that. It would probably be a bit more localized, but I mean, if
Sure.
you kind of have to know what's important to your manager. I mean, and if you don't know the goals and objectives of the manager, start there. Like ask and understand what are your goals and objectives. Start local, and you can obviously expand out from that if you don't understand the lay of the land or how and where you can contribute. It's probably better to start local because I think if you start asking your VP or something, gee, what's important, and you don't know what's important to your local manager, it 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 probably won't end like as positive as if you had a pretty good idea of like what those issues were. All right, I've solved those, I've helped solve those issues. Now I'm going to look for a bigger set of issues to solve. If you're immediately jumping to what's the global issue that we're trying to solve as a company, you may not realize that there are things right in your own backyard.
That makes a lot of sense. And it also gives you the confidence, right? Where you're building a track record, you're building a name for yourself. You got a few wins under your belt, and that puts you on the radar of other folks and makes that transition when you do reach out just a bit easier.
Exactly. I mean, ultimately, that is your reputation. It'll precede you, and people will know that's the person that really gets stuff done in this area. And so having them reach out and look at some other area, like, yeah, I'm going to be supportive of that because they've really been a rainmaker when it comes to this other adjacent area.
On that theme of rainmaking, was there a particular promotion or project that proved to be really pivotal to your career? What was it, and how did you overcome or achieve it?
That's a really good question. I have a hard time saying there was just this one thing happened. I've always seen it as almost a linear progression of looking for the next challenge ahead and solving that. And obviously, yeah, early in my career, I knew what the manager wanted and needed. And I overachieved on that and looked up to the next level. And okay, now I understand this kind of area and I'm going to help deliver for that area such that it opens up the doors along the way. If everything that you do turns out well, people are going to give you increasing responsibility along the way. And so there have been a ton of different things that have happened along the way. It's really just been situational, like where you're planted. You want to bloom in those areas and just keep moving the ball forward along the way. Sometimes when people have asked, like, what was your career objective or something like that? I mean, I had some idea that, yeah, I kind of wanted to be a CTO, but I'd say I've never looked at it like I'm going to become a CTO and I'm just going to do whatever it takes to get there. I've always, approached it more from the perspective of I'm just going to keep focusing on the path more immediately ahead of me, and I'm going to do a good job there. And that continues to open up, pathways beyond that. And eventually, I mean, ultimately it did work out that way, but I don't know that I would have been necessarily disappointed if I had continued to be challenged and delivered core capabilities for the businesses that I was involved in and having the technical challenges along the way as well.
That's so interesting because it sounds like what you're saying is that, hey, if I just do good work and keep doing good work, people will notice, and then maybe you'll get that promotion, and then maybe you'll get that raise, and it just becomes this flywheel that'll move forward. So instead of, and this is helpful, Rick, right? Because a lot of people on Blind, they want to get that promotion right away, or they want to move from Apple to Amazon or whatever. And they're just so focused on this is what I have to do for social clout and social status and what have you. But you're saying basically is do a good job, work hard, and people are going to notice, and it's going to flow and it's going to work.
Yeah, I think so. I guess the only nuance to that is I think you have to do things that are of value to the business, to the organization as well. I can definitely see I'm doing really good work, but it's not moving the needle for the company. And that probably won't put you on the track that you want to necessarily go on if you're ambitious. I think vastly more times, it is really just understanding what is important, to that particular business or organization and making sure that you are really driving to the positive outcomes.
This sounds really Machiavellian, but so would you, in a way, would you suggest, like, let's say Rick or I are looking for a job, right? Within the company, let's say, and to find out where's the biggest pain point, where is like, everyone's like, and say, all right, how can I get in there and do it and have the skills? And then all of a sudden I'm a hero because I was able to help solve this big problem. Is that something you would suggest if the person has the skills and the ability to say, hey, let me find the really tough stuff and let me go after it because that's how I can make my break. And like with Rick's question, that's how I can make it everything turns around and all of a sudden I get to the next level and another level up.
I totally agree with a couple of caveats. One is that if it's a tough area and it's not going to help the company in the long run, that would be, one thing to be aware of. And then the other is that you have to know yourself, like both what you are good at today and what you're interested in and what you can learn. But I think if you put yourself on that, I'll call it like a bleeding edge to where you are focused on an area where you have, call it 80% of the skills to address it, and you are confident and motivated to learn the other 20%, that's an area where, yeah, you can be successful. And I think that has definitely been something for me along my path where I have taken on responsibilities in a way that it didn't become unmanageable. I pushed myself, I wanted to learn, but I also knew what my core capabilities and skills were, such that I had a pretty good read on terms of, will I be successful at this? And so you really have to have some judgment in terms of, yeah, this is a problem. It's really big. And I can do it with these parameters. Like maybe I need some help on this or that. You want to make sure that you're stepping into it with full knowledge as much as you can. Obviously, if you're going to a new company, I mean, that's one reason to stay, with a company for a little bit in terms of you understand the context of why is this a big problem at the company? Is it because the company is refusing to invest in it or things like that? Whereas if you're jumping into a brand new company, you may not have that context. Is really hard to get that from a couple of interviews. So I think understanding that and understanding yourself and understanding what you're going to be good at. And again, you constantly have to push yourself in an educated way such that, all right, I'm motivated. I want to learn about whether and some problems in the company are going to be more about people. Some of them are going to be more about a particular technology. Obviously, at the end of the day, a lot of technical problems are people problems. So you have to know which types of challenges you can solve and which of them you're going to need help with, and can I get that help? Can I line that up to be successful in the role? But basically, the short answer is yes, with those caveats.
I appreciate that reminder for the need for continued introspection and assessment, because I've certainly fallen into this trap earlier in my career where you think you're doing the great work and then you get to that performance review cycle and you're just thinking like, oh gosh, I should have like increased scope to earn that promotion. And then you're just trying to figure out, oh, which of the things that I've done in the last 6-12 months demonstrated increasing scope or impact for the business. Whereas if I had done that all along, not waiting till that moment to think of it, probably would have served me a bit better in my career early on.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think obviously it's working with your manager to help along that path. But I do think a lot of it falls on each of our shoulders to have that map internally of what am I good at? What do the business need? How am I going to plot my path along that trajectory?
I appreciate you for sharing your map and giving us this insight into how we can level up our careers. Thanks for coming on the show, Charles.
Great. Well, thank you.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it. It was a fun discussion.
That's it for The Blind Ambition. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and a review. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.